Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Everyone welcome. Surah Al-Hijr, chapter 15, verses 1 to 9. This is the next surah after Surah Ibrahim, and we'll look at verses 1 to 9. And these are the references, and this is our contact details in case anyone wishes to get in touch with us for any query or question. Now, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, what I've done in this surah is that I've also thought that we should look at Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim and look at its meanings. I've taken it from volume 1 of Meanings of the Quran. Allah Rahman ar-Rahim has sent down this supreme book so that the responsibilities which He has taken regarding the nourishment of the things of the universe and of mankind become fulfilled. This nourishment is not possible without the guidance of Wahi. We had covered Rahman and Raheem under the divine attributes sometimes back. But just to remind that Rahman and Raheem have the same root, which is Raham, and which essentially means nourishment and development of all human abilities, and which includes self as well. So we should keep that in mind. Rahman is slightly on a higher scale, which is the emergent evolutionary basis, while Raheem is on a progressive evolutionary basis. In the human world, it is human beings who carry the responsibilities of Allah using our own hands. Therefore, it is incumbent on Allah's companions that in any task they set, there is a conscious intention that the aim should ultimately be the completion of Allah's program. When these words appear at the beginning of a surah, they are attributed to Allah, i.e., it is considered that Allah has described this about Himself. Then this will mean Allah's declaration is that we have revealed this Quran or this verse of the Quran so that our attributes of Rahmaniyat and Rahimiyat become manifested for all. So this will be the view if we take it from Allah's point of view. And if we take it from our own point of view, and when a moment begins any task with these words as the premise of the task, then it will mean I am taking this work in hand so that Allah's attributes of Rahmaniyat and Rahimiyat become manifested. This means that the purpose of Bismillah is to bring out Allah's attribute of Rahmaniyat and Rahimiyat in a practical form through human hands. Just to illustrate it from today's presentation, that what it means is that when I said Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, I should keep it in mind that I am going to carry out this presentation with a view to help ourselves to develop the understanding in the verses of 1 to 9 of Surah Al-Hijr, as these are applicable to Deen. So Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim should not be uttered mechanically as most people do. It should be in our awareness that what exactly we are going to do next and what are its applications. So it starts with Allah, Bismillah, with all His attributes, and then it says that Rahman and Raheem are applicable over here in whatever I'm going to do next. Now let us look at the first two verses of today, 1 to 2. Through the Quran we can acquire knowledge clarifying the process of Raheem or the nourishment. Alif Lam Ra Tilka Ayatul Kitabe wa Quranin Mubin. It is the declaration of Allah, all-knowing, that is Alim, and nourishing, that is Raheem, that these are the verses of that code of Allah, i.e. the Quran, which explains its meanings very clearly. Next verse is Robama Yawaddul Lazina Kafaru Law Kanu Muslimin. O Rasul, now this revolution is reaching its decisive stage. After this, these people who are opposing it now will lament that they wish they had also accepted it. Now the reflections on these two verses enhance level of understanding about Kufr. Applied together, Alim and Raheem manifest a new aspect of Quranic thought. By stating Ayatul Kitab, the verse has drawn our attention to the signs in the book, which, when perceived, move our understanding forward, thus enabling ourselves for the next step on this path. The Quran's integrity as a book is beyond doubt, and since its signs allow us to examine our own thinking process objectively, it cannot be a product of human thought. It demands study with wholehearted intention in order to comprehend it. First, we must intentionally bring its signs into the mind and then allow the mind to analyze it further. So both things should be going one after another. Firstly, that what am I studying, what am I reading, and then what are its implications for my life and for the mankind at large. It must be viewed as a code of laws and values for a system and for the intended progression of individual life. Only then can the full benefit of the Quran be accrued. Initially, of course, when we come to the Quran, we come to it individually to find out what exactly is in the Quran, and then, of course, we look at it, that what are its applications in terms of wider mankind. The second verse points to a law concerning the human psyche. The people who oppose al-Haq will ultimately be subdued and thus realize that the benefits associated with the straight path are far superior to those which they were trying to protect, i.e. based on batil. And this is very important for us to understand, and we have gone over it a few times before as well, that people who are on the path of batil, they ultimately get exposed. And the batil system has its own weaknesses because it is like a house of cards. And when it comes tumbling down, that those people who participated in it and helped build it up, then they become disappointed. And this is the way humanity is progressing through the history. Here the Quran has called it the path and mentality of Kufr. Now they can appreciate objectively that their confrontational posture was wrong, and consequently the time of their life spent in this way has gone to waste. And this is very interesting, to which the Quran has drawn our attention, that the people who were opposing Haqq, ultimately they failed. And as a result of that defeat and failure of their efforts, that despair which sets in, and they then regret for opposing Haqq. And by then, of course, they have lost a lot of time of their life. Of course, if they still have time left before their death, they can come back to this path, but they will not have the benefit of losing that time and all the good they could do in that period. They have been left behind in the progression of life, a direct consequence of their own myopic outlook. Next verse is the perfect recipe to lag behind in life, to exist at an animalistic level. Zarhum yaqulu wa yatamattau wa yulhihimul amalu fasawfa ya'lamun. At this time, leave them in their condition so that they eat and drink at the animalistic level of life and take their advantage from the means of sustenance. According to them, the very aim of their life is that they remain busy in these pastimes. In this way, their many and varied desires keep them ignorant of the higher objectives of life. The time is not far now when they will come to know the consequences of this false path. There is still a period of respite. We should keep it in mind, as we have discussed previously as well, that there are two times of respite. One is at an individual level. The time of respite for each one of us is up to the time of death in this life. And collectively, of course, it is at the level of nations. And nations have far longer time of respite than individuals. Some verses to illustrate it further. I quoted two verses over here, and which are, I think we have gone through these previously as well, but these are important, and these bring out this aspect very clearly. وَلَقَدْ زَرَعْنَا لِجَهَنَّمَ كَثِيرًا مِنَ الْجِنِّ وَالْإِنسِ لَهُمْ قُلُوبٌ لَا يَفْقَهُونَ بِهَا وَلَهُمْ أَعْيُنٌ لَا يُبْصِرُونَ بِهَا وَلَهُمْ آذَانٌ لَا يَسْمَعُونَ بِهَا أُولَٰئِكَ الْأَنْعَامُ بَلْ هُمْ أَضَلُّ أُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْغَافِلُونَ. Many are the jinns and human beings we have made for hell. Jinn over here should be taken, the people who used to live nomadic life, for example, Bedouins, away from the settled human habitations like towns, cities, and villages. They have hearts wherewith they understand not, eyes wherewith they see not, ears wherewith they hear not. They are like cattle, nay more astray, for they are heedless of the warning. It is a supreme loss not to fully bring out our best in this life by using the rational side of ourselves within the guidance of the Quran. So the Quran over here is saying that we should not live life at an animalistic level. And we should grow up As human beings, because we have been given intellect, we have desires, we can make choices, and we should utilize those choices to our advantage in this life. Next verse is Inna Allah yudkhilul lazina amanu wa amilus salihati jannatin tajri min tahtiha al-anharu wallazina kafaru yatamatta'una wa yakuluna kama ta'kulul an'amu wan naru maswan lahum. Verily Allah will admit those who have iman and do salih deeds, and we know salih deeds means those deeds which after acquiring iman help develop ourselves for the system of Deen. To gardens beneath which rivers flow, while those who do Kufr will earn some of the benefits of this life and eat as cattle eat, and the fire will be their abode. The Kufr over here means that not following the path of guidance with a view to develop ourselves and then become beneficial for the mankind, rather than just living a life for our own selfish ends. Here the Quran has compared the two aspects of human conduct by basing it on evidence. Some reflections on this verse. Why has Allah compared a non-Quranic existence to an animalistic one, or even worse? This point needs our careful attention in the light of the Quranic value system. Animals do not need any external value system to guide them in their physical life. And we know it because they don't need, they go according to their instincts, which are naturally placed within them by birth. And if we also follow their pattern, then we are no better than animals. In fact, we do injustice to our own self as well as the world around us, because we have certain abilities which we should have used for the good of others and for our own good as well. When we look at the Quran and the man-devised world around us, it becomes evidently clear that by not following the guidance of the Quran, we create horrendous problems for ourselves and others. In the animal kingdom, they do not face these issues as they do not possess metacognitive abilities. Hence, they just follow their natural instincts. They do not have to worry about the life of the hereafter. Their life ends with physical death after they fulfill their purpose of existence. It is Allah who creates the purpose, and we discover it using our intellect and reasoning. Important point over here is that there are two concepts of life in the world which human beings follow. One is where life ends with death, and that is what happens with animals. And second says, no, we go beyond that, and that is the Quranic concept that the life at a self level is one continuity. So if we keep that in mind, then these things become very clear. In the case of human beings, by virtue of possessing a self and cognitive abilities, we need to strive for a higher purpose of life. The purpose of destination for which we are created at the outset. If despite being invited to this higher purpose, we do not pay attention to it and fail to acquire a self for the hereafter, then the struggles of our entire life go wasted. This is worse than animals, as they have nothing in the hereafter, being totally physical, whereas in our case, we have latent potentials within us, and if we fail to manifest these, we are placed lower than animals. So we should not downgrade ourselves even from the animalistic existence. Our existence should be higher than animals, and for that we have to utilize our intellect and our potentials placed within us. If we possess all the potentials to develop ourselves and establish a system of Deen with all its associated benefits, and we do not strive for it, where do we stand in the balance of accountability as defined by Allah in the Quran? I just thought that as some kind of a question should be put at the end, which will provoke our thoughts, and particularly for those who are watching this slide first time. 15, 4 to 5 verses. Nothing happens in the human world without a cause. Everything follows laws. وَمَا أَهْلَكْنَا مِنْ قَرْيَةٍ إِلَّا وَلَهَا كِتَابٌ مَعْلُومٌ مَا تَسْبِقُ مِنْ أُمَّةٍ أَجَلَهَا وَمَا يَسْتَأْخِرُونَ. Just see how succinctly and with what brevity and beauty Quran has summed up two important aspects of the law of requital. And before them too, we did not destroy any nation before the completion of their time of respite. It is not Allah which destroys human beings or destroys the nations. Nations destroy themselves. But of course, Allah relates it to Himself because it happens according to His laws. This respite is determined in accordance with our law of requital, and this is not some concealed or hidden matter. It's not been kept secret. We know it. Through our own actions, we find it out very quickly that if I put my finger in fire, it will burn. So human beings act as a sort of a criterion against their own self. When they do wrong, the consequences of doing wrong should alert them, should warn them. But if they insist on doing wrong, then of course the consequences will sooner or later catch up with their deeds. This law of respite of ours is so firm that neither any nation can be destroyed earlier than this, nor can remain alive following this. The consequences of the wrong path appear precisely at their own time. We have gone through the importance of time of respite earlier. Now, some reflections. Understanding the functioning of the law of requital leads to strengthening of our self. Here the Quran has used the term laha kitabun ma'loom. If we utilize our intellect and reasoning, then we will be able to witness the fact that everything in the universe is tied in the grip of the laws defined by Allah. Kitabun means, it means book, it means laws as well. Ma'loom means which are known. If we make an effort, we will find them out. These are not secret kept away from human beings. The world in which we live, it is meant to be a comfortable existence, convenient existence where we exactly should know whatever we are doing, it will have consequences and we will reap the benefits of our good deeds here. And same goes for the wrong deeds. His own will functions within these laws. This knowledge provides immense freedom to man and gives access to his latent potentials. If the knowledge is not made use of correctly, then man suffers as a result of his own voluntary ignorance. Those individuals who acquire it understand that it must be shared with the rest of mankind. Next is concerning the rise and fall of nations. The Quran states this also follows a strict law. The time of respite is defined by the conduct of the collective intellect and deeds. So nations who exceed the scale of evil, then of course the results appear very quickly, maybe within a decade. But if they are doing wrong bit by bit on a smaller scale, then of course it will take maybe many centuries. This can be clearly understood from the history of past nations, recent or distant, when looked at using the Quranic perspective. If we introduce our own bias, we will see either a random set of disconnected events or perhaps we will seek a fatalistic explanation. The Quran states that neither is true. So there is nothing random in our world. Whatever is happening is following laws. Wherever we start getting wrong results, it means we have wittingly or unwittingly gone wrong somewhere in the past. So we should look at our own past and see where did we go wrong. And same goes for the nations. We must look for the root cause using the criterion of the permanent values. For example, over here I've quoted two permanent values. First is Inna Allah la yughayyiru ma biqawmin hatta yughayyiru ma bi anfusihim. We have gone through this part of the verse previously under Surah Al-Hijr, where Quran says that Allah will not change the state of a nation until they change what is within their own psyche. And second one is Amma ma yanfa'u nasa fayamkusu fil earth. That is what is good for mankind, that remains on earth. Ask what was the collective psyche of that nation and what was the nature of their system in the light of Allah's values. Even in these two values, we can figure out when nations are declining, our nations are in inertia and stagnant, that what exactly they are doing with their life and what sort of a collective psyche they have, what sort of a psyche their leaders have. So these things help us to judge them, to find out where exactly they stand. Next two verses, 6 and 7, reaction of people when they do not like the message. Very interesting verses here. وَقَالُوا يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِي نُزِّلَ عَلَيْهِ الذِّكْرُ إِنَّكَ لَمَجْنُونٌ لَوْ مَا تَأْتِينَ بِالْمَلَائِكَةِ إِن كُنتَ مِنَ الصَّادِقِينَ. At the present time, these people are immersed in a fantasy of ignorance, and the power of their intoxication is such that they declare, O you on whom this Quran is being revealed, you are insane. They will call him insane or call anyone insane when they talk against their own desires, when they stop them from doing what they are doing. And if they have the means to do it, they won't like it. If you're truthful in your claim, then why do you not bring Malaika before us? And Malaika over here means that why don't you bring some kind of a miracle or some forces of nature or someone to support you? Because we don't find people are on the haq very powerful. And some important points for further reflection on this. First one is we have observed the Quran influences our outlook and conduct in the real world. It removes our false beliefs which act as chains on our thinking, and so we enjoy greater freedom. And though we have experienced that freedom, that how many wrong beliefs we have got rid of by coming to the Quran. It is therefore natural that we wish others to benefit as well. We see with greater clarity the folly of their paths, which has caused so many others in the world seemingly unnecessary suffering. We wish for them to benefit from the guidance of Wahi. However, we soon realize that most others are not at all interested. And the way to find out whether they are interested or not, we should keep giving the message to others. Those who will be interested will come to the Quran. Those who are not interested, of course, they might oppose it. They might even use force. But we have to pass on the message tactfully. Some of these people, seeing our enthusiasm and motivation for a path which runs so counter to their own, think we have gone insane. And we do come across these kind of comments as well. They think that something has gone wrong with you. And because they think that they do not conform with the majority, despite the fact that the majority is reaping the results of their own wrongs. The same was the state of human beings at the time of the revelation of the Quran. At least this is consistent, and Quran verifies it. Nothing has changed and will change no matter how advanced the human world becomes through technology. The Quran has guided us on this aspect of the human psyche for all times. So this should strengthen our iman in the Quran. It should strengthen our conviction that the message of the Quran is consistent across the whole of the history of mankind. It is going to remain the same right to the end of time. So that is something which is very encouraging and provides strength to us. The second verse has two aspects. Firstly, they may be demanding a supernatural event which can force them to accept the message of Wahi, i.e. a miracle. Secondly, they are demanding mockingly to bring forward this disaster of which they are being warned. Both aspects are pointing to their irrational thinking, their willful blindness, whereas the Quran invites us to apply our rational thought process. Next verse is 15:8. Events in the world are never without a cause. The verse is, Ma nunazzilul malaikata illa bil haqqi wa ma kanu iza munzarin. They could have only understood this thing, that we do not just send Malaika for nothing. And this is a very important statement. Ma nunazzilul malaikata illa bil haq. That Malaika do not descend without a purpose, without haq, without something to be accomplished. This descend at that time when the moment arrives for the consequences to become a concrete reality. That is what the final phase of the struggle between haq and batil is. After that, no one receives any respite. And I've put down some comments here. The Malaika, i.e. natural forces, work according to laws. Here the Quran has answered the demand of the opponents of the system that Malaika has noted do not appear at random. These forces have a precise role to play in the universe, which includes the human world. Being invisible does not mean that these do not exist. These not only exist, but also carry out their tasks as defined for each one of them. It is important for us that Malaika are the forces which are invisible and could be visible as well, as I've mentioned later on. But the point over here is that these have a specific role in carrying out their tasks. If we remember under the Law of Requital, Quran says, that how these forces, Malaika, help in the operation or functioning of the Law of Requital. This is something we have to carry out a lot of research and observation through our own life as well. We need to understand these aspects by striving on the path of Allah, and this is what the Quran has stated under the law of requital. وَخَلَقَ اللَّهُ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضَ بِالْحَقِّ وَلِتُجْزَى كُلُّ نَفْسٍ بِمَا كَسَبَتْ وَهُمْ لَا يُظْلَمُونَ. The bottom line is that nobody will be treated unjustly. The way system functions is that it is very precise, accurate, and no human being will ever be able to deny their own conduct, whatever their self has become at any point in time. The first part of this verse draws our attention to the fact that the universe is created to ensure that the second part occurs. خَلَقَ اللَّهُ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضَ بِالْحَقِّ has been done so that each and every deed, kasab, bears the fruition of its own deeds. And we had gone through this verse in detail in our previous presentation. The first part of this verse draws our attention to the fact that the universe is created to ensure that the second part occurs. This aspect will need further research in order to establish the link between the two parts in practical observation. The last one is, however, one thing is clear, that the physical phenomena do influence the way we conduct our affairs in the world. For example, so-called natural disasters demand the use of our faculties to protect against their effects. The discovery and utilization of other forces of nature, for example, solar power, wind power, hydraulic force, wave power, gravitational force, these are the forces we are quite well aware at this point in time, etc., are some of the examples which different nations have managed to take advantage of. Utilizing these to complete Allah's program leads to development of the self. Now we come to the last verse for today's presentation, 59, and before that I made this slide just to emphasize on the use of intellect and reasoning. Why did Allah preserve and protect the Quran for all times? The verse 59 needs further reflection. We will look at some related aspects in more detail. The Quran states in the verse 2573, وَالَّذِينَ إِذَا ذُكِّرُوا بِآيَاتِ رَبِّهِمْ لَمْ يَخِرُّوا عَلَيْهَا سُمًّا وَعُمْيَانًا. These people do not get carried away by their emotions, but take every step of theirs after careful deliberation. Now this is about mu'mineen. If we look at the verses prior to these, you will see that Quran is mentioning some traits of mu'mineen. So much so that even when the laws of Allah are presented before them, they do not bow down to them merely emotionally, by ignoring knowledge, vision, intellect, and reasoning. They do not adopt these either as if they are blind and deaf. They adopt these after careful thought. And we have seen it that by sharing these talks, we look at the deliberate side of our thought process. It is obvious that when these people do not act on the laws of Allah without careful reflection and reasoning first, then how can they act on other matters of life without using intellect and reasoning? And this is important, that when we come to the Quran and increase our perception and our awareness in the world, and we look at the problems differently in the light of the Quran, we are enabled not only to look at Deen itself, but also look at our own affairs in the world. Verse 59, the Quran is protected and preserved in its entirety for all times. And I put down this question here, why? And we will look at some aspects of this why. Inna nahnu nazzalna zikra wa inna lahu lahafizun. And I've highlighted some of the points here, nazzalna zikra and lahafizun, and we will put some light on it subsequently. We have sent down this Quran, thus its every promise will certainly come true, and since this has to remain as a code to guide the whole of mankind for all time, it is complete in every respect. It requires no change or alteration. Hence, we will protect it ourselves, and no power on earth will be able to erase it. A great assurance. Let us look at the root of La Hafizun. And this is the root here. And I've only taken the gist of it. There is a lot more to it in Lughatul Quran. Guarding something, protecting it. It is also noted that the words in which Ha and Fa appear together, the meaning of collection is implicit in them. Very important, because if we say La Hafizun, only protecting and preservation, then this is part of the truth. So if we take this connotation, that means that what is put together cannot be disintegrated, cannot be dispersed. And it has been put together, and that is why it has been called as it has been protected and preserved. Protection has this aspect that something is not allowed to disperse itself and is kept combined or whole. It's just like a formula of water. You cannot disintegrate it unless you do it deliberately. Keeping things under control, what is in possession should be given protection. Some of the applications, there are guardians on every self, and I quoted the verse here. My Rabb is guardian on everything. These are the application of the derivatives of this root. Woman is declared to be Hafiz, i.e. taking care of the law of Allah. Those who ensure protection of the book of Allah. See, it is important that Mu'mineen are the ones who are to protect this book of Allah. And protection means over here not only its physical integrity and the integrity of its words and its contents, but to ensure that it is projected that way, the way Allah wants us to project it. Nasser, who is a linguist, has said that the straight and clear path is also called Al-Hafiz. Also used in relation to the universal forces which keep everything under control according to the law of Allah. And this is taken from Lughatul Quran by Allama Parwez. Further reflections on this verse. Here the Quran has declared that since it has been completed as a code of guidance for all times, hence its original Arabic text will remain fully preserved for all time. This assertion is supported by other verses. For example, Quran says, Al-Yawma akmaltu lakum deenukum. That on this time, the Deen of ours has been completed. That is, our Deen has been completed. The Quran has been completed as a system of Deen. This also means that Deen is equal to Al-Quran. In another place, it is made clear that وَتَمَّتْ كَلِمَاتُ رَبِّكَ صِدْقًا وَعَدْلًا لَا مُبَدِّلَ لِكَلِمَاتِهِ وَهُوَ السَّمِيعُ الْعَلِيمُ. That Allah has completed His words with sidq and with justice. Sidq means truth as a reality, and these are not going to change. And that is the beauty of it, that how much assurance has been given to us that nothing will change. And these are consistent all across the existence of mankind. Wahuwa Samiul Alim, and He hears as well as He has knowledge. And the same attributes we should also display by following the Quran. The words of Allah are completed, and there is never going to be any change or alteration in these words. This aspect can be verified by us that these laws are immutable. This should lead to steadfastness in our resolve and help us remove any underlying doubts and suspicions arising in our hearts. Next is, since it is sent down, meaning the fountainhead of Wahi lies outside the domain of the human heart and mind, hence there is no possibility of its being contaminated by concoctions of the human intellect, emotions, desires, biases, etc. This is further reinforced by declaring, أَفَلَا يَتَدَبَّرُونَ الْقُرْآنَ وَلَوْ كَانَ مِنْ عِنْدِ غَيْرِ اللَّهِ لَوَجَدُوا فِيهِ اخْتِلَافًا كَثِيرًا. That if we pay attention to the Quran the way it guides us to pay attention into it, and then we will see that it cannot be from other than Allah, because if it was from anyone other than Allah, in the Ghairillahi, Lawajadu, we would have found in it ikhtilafan kasira, a lot of contradictions. That means if we find contradictions, then of course we are not paying attention to the guidance of the Quran. If approached with reason, and if the guidelines for its understanding as contained within it are kept before us, then we will inevitably conclude that no contradiction exists within this guidance. Only a text without contradictions could be preserved for time immemorial. Because things change. In human world, we have seen that as the human rational thought progresses, things keep changing. But in the case of the Quran, the criteria never changes. If one finds contradictions, then one should seek the cause of the error within one's own psyche to resolve the issue themselves. Those not willing to correct their own thinking will not find guidance in the Quran. And this is the position in present day's world as well, that a lot of people read the Quran and they find contradictions, they differ. And when they come to difference, that means their understanding is raw, their understanding is not accurate. Because once we come to the permanent values, like once we come to the manifestation of the divine attributes, there shouldn't be any differences. Continuing with more reflections. Sending down this book fulfills the commitment of Allah to mankind as part of His value of Rububiyyat. If you remember, Rububiyyat means providing all those means of nourishment and sustenance for things of the universe to reach their destination. And in the case of man, since destination is eternal, it is the Sirat al-Mustaqim, which continues beyond our death. That means Rububiyyat should help us to promote that in that destination. Now it is up to those who are seeking guidance to educate themselves, enhance the horizon of their intellect and consciousness, develop their selves, and then emerge as a consequence of this as one ummah to perform those duties which Allah has noted in this book. And here I've quoted the verse from Surah Anbiya, لَقَدْ أَنزَلْنَا عَلَيْكُمْ كِتَابًا فِيهِ ذِكْرُكُمْ أَفَلَا تَعْقِلُونَ. That we have surely sent down this book on you, in which is your own eminence, in which it is about your own life, your own destination, your guidance for the system of Deen. And if you use intellect, taqilun, which is used as a verb, as an action tense, that if you use it, then you will be able to understand it. Quran demands a very high level of intellectual reasoning from us. Another important point to note is that the original Arabic text of the Quran is fully preserved. Thus, we need to look at the Quran objectively and in relation to the prevalent rational thought in the era in which we live, whatever its state of development. The Quran teaches us the method for its own critical appraisal, and all interpretations must be subjected to this standard. We have seen earlier, I quoted the verse 2573, in which the Quran is asking us not to believe anything in the Quran without putting it through our own rational thinking process. If these do not meet the Quranic criteria for al-haq, it must be rejected based on evidence. The Quran requires human thinking and endeavor to apply it to the needs and context of the period in which we live. Anyone coming later will need to look at it afresh in the light of the needs of their epoch. In this way, rational thought keeps growing and expanding with the passage of time. Next is, how does Allah preserve and protect the Quran? I've noted down some points here which need our reflection and thinking that how did it happen? We have heard about it, but I thought just to put it in record. The responsibilities which Allah has noted in the Quran are to be carried out by Jamaat-e-Mu'mineen in the human world. Hence, we need to look at the way the Quran's original text has been preserved and protected. In the earlier era of Islam, the system of Deen was established and Jamaat-e-Mu'mineen witnessed that the Quran is completed. And if we look at the verse 5:101, where Allah says that do not ask questions at this point in time, unnecessary questions, because if things are made clear to you, then these will make life hard for you. So whatever is being revealed will provide you enough flexibility to act, and it will not take away your freedom which you rightfully deserve, and needed to be preserved and protected as directed by Allah. Having moments selves, they ensured this for all times to come. Now, this is very important, that those people who come to the Quran and see the integrity of it and its usefulness towards the system of Deen, and then they manage to establish the system of Deen successfully within a very short span of their lives, they are not going to let it go away and not to make sure that it is protected in the form of a book. And this was part of their responsibility being Mu'mineen. And this is part of our responsibility as well. The continuity of Deen required that its code of laws and values remains protected and preserved for all times. And they knew it, they understood it. And there are a number of verses in the Quran which point to this fact. It is Mu'mineen who figure out the importance of the Quran and its integrity as the book of guidance. Because it is Hudallil Muttaqeen. The book is for Muttaqeen. It's a guidance for them. Others, of course, will always have suspicion and doubts and skepticism about it. Firstly, the Quran itself provides evidence that Rasul-ullah ensured that it was compiled in a book form during his lifetime. And this fact is noted in a number of verses where the Quran addresses it as the book. We have seen it, Al-Kitab is mentioned at many places. Secondly, the Quran was and is memorized by many right from the start, which is consistent with the written copy still available from the earliest times. Despite efforts made to place doubts regarding the differences in tilawat, which is in recitation, the integrity of the original text has not been affected. Evidence for this lies within the Quran. Even now we have seen that people who do not follow the Quran or do not understand the Quran, they still memorize it for emotive reasons, for religious reason, and for the sake of swab, which is fine, because that is one way of preserving the integrity of the Quran. Next is, thirdly, when we analyze the Quran according to its original Arabic, it is self-evident that it is complete as it covers all the permanent values required for the development of an individual and a system. It possesses all the divine attributes for one to form a precise and accurate concept of Allah, upon which one can mold one's own self. The books and recorded thus by Allama Parwez contain this analysis in detail. I put it down because Allama Parwez has written all his books with Deen in his mind, and that is the way he has analyzed the Quran very, very effectively. Fourthly, those who have come to the Quran, that is through Islam, and are reading it as a book of guidance for all times, are on to the task of taking full advantage of its preserved and protected status. And that is the way we need to look at it. This provides conviction in the book and leads to elimination of doubts and cognitive dissonances. Next, the word itself is reaching that stage of its trial and error process where it will need the Quranic system of sustenance to repair itself. The final proof of completeness is in the reality of ourself and the system we create using Quranic guidance. If complete, we will progress towards the self and society Allah has promised us. In other words, if the formula remains the same, then the results of its application must also remain the same. I will repeat it. In other words, if the formula remains the same, that is, if the Quran is the same and it produces a certain set of results in the earlier era of Islam, then the results of its application must also remain the same. So it has retained its efficacy even today. We should get on with the job and do it. There is no need for any more Anbiya of Allah. So this also comes out of its preserved and protected status of the Quran. This verse has buried the issue of the finality of messengerhood. The book of Allah fulfills the need for external guidance and is complete for this purpose. Mankind has sufficiently matured through the evolution of the rational thought process and developed the means of preserving texts, disseminating and sharing information through now firmly established means. The important point over here is to note that everything in the universe, including the human world, is producing precise results. It's an accurate world which is working under laws, and there are finer scales. Of course, there are micro scales and macro scales, and we can figure it out through study and research. And over here, we should keep it in mind that Allah sends messengers, that is, Anbiya and messengers, for a specific purpose. And if there is no need, Allah is not going to send more, because there is no need. There's no point in sending another human being when the book has already been completed and people have developed sufficient intellect to understand it. If they do not follow it, it's their problem. Someone out of them should draw their attention to it. Muslims who have suffered due to contaminated tafsir and of course translations as well, their responsibility for this as they deliberately wish to go astray and follow their base desires. The attempt to adulterate the book of Allah and its message, as we have seen, is against Allah's law and cannot be achieved. So we have seen that the original text cannot be contaminated. Never mind whatever efforts human beings can do to fulfill their own desires, to deviate, to earn living out of by selling the verses of the Quran. Despite this, it has been attempted through the books of Ahadith, which have been deliberately invented. Nothing can be added to it unlike Ahadith, and nothing can be taken out of it, for example, by cancelling the verses. Those who perpetrate this suffer the consequences of violating Allah's law. And their suffering is right before our eyes. By not following the Quran, where do they stand vis-a-vis those secular nations, those nations who are using their intellect and reasoning, and who think that the life will end with death, and they they are fully convinced of this fact that their life will end with death, and how much they have done in the world in terms of the technological development. And those who have done this adulteration, this contamination and this tampering, where do they stand? So this becomes an evidence in itself. We don't have to go very far to look for evidence. The Quran is pointing to it right in its own folds and within its own many verses. They fail to grasp the knowledge designed to establish the system of Deen when applied correctly at any time in the passage of human history. The issue and questions before us in 21st century. Over here, I put down some questions and food for thought, and of course, these will be answered in our subsequent presentations as well. Why have the followers of the Quran not benefited from its teachings for over 1,000 years? Why did they abandon its guidance despite being the beneficiaries of the system for at least a few centuries in the initial era of Islam? And this is something which is quite fascinating, that initially there was only the Quran, and they got the system in and they benefited from it. And the message spread like wildfire everywhere, and people benefited from it, and they were able to establish a true welfare state. And then subsequently they abandoned it. Why did they abandon it? And that's something we should think about it, because they contaminated the Quran deliberately. Of course, there were conspiracies, but why did they allow these conspiracies and intrigues to become rooted in, to get established? And they participated in it. In today's world, Western secular thought has allowed people to benefit from modern conveniences, and in the physical sense, they prosper. Conversely, the majority of the Muslim world hold attitudes and beliefs that run counter to the evidence presented by science. And this is what happens, that when we contaminate our own thinking and move away from the Quran, we actually do a tremendous loss to our own cognitive faculties. Because once the belief systems become contaminated, then those belief systems are the ones who are going to influence our deeds, our actions. And if our thought process is contaminated, then how are we going to get positive effects out of our own conduct and behavior in the real world? What is the cause behind this? Why do human beings persist in believing what is demonstrably false? What leads to the divisions we see within the Ummah, which was intended to be one? And I've come across this kind of mentality that they recognize it is wrong, and then they say, why should we be the first one to initiate it? Then who is going to initiate it? Should we keep going on the wrong path? Somebody shouldn't stop and then draw the attention of everyone just because of the fear of the majority. Should we be fearing majority, or should we be fearing of the consequences of our wrong deeds? What stops these Muslim nations from treating with one another fairly and establishing reciprocity in their mutual dealings? These are the barriers to Deen, and their answers will have to be found to progress towards the oneness demanded by the Quran. This can only be achieved through rational application of Quranic laws and values. Have we taken full advantage of the fact that the Quran is completed, preserved, and sufficient in all respects as a code of guidance for all times? If not, then what is missing in our understanding and its application, which is preventing us from achieving the benefits of this life and the life of the hereafter? So these are some of the questions which I thought, and all of us can add more to it. Finally, how should Mu'mineen view this verse? It is implicit in this verse that the human self needs assurance and certainty in this life, free from doubts and suspicions, especially when surrounded by the system of Batil. Because we are surrounded by the system of Batil, we should not only question Batil, but we should also look at the ways to see that how can we get out of it, and also look at the psyche of those people who are falling and conforming to Batil in order to follow the straight path defined by the Quran. This status of the Quran is an important permanent value for Mu'mineen. Others will always suffer from doubts created by their minds. But developing a solid resolve requires freedom from doubt. Only then can we keep striving hard on this path together. If you remember right at the beginning, the Quran says, Al-Kitab la rayba fihi. Raib is is the kind of a doubt where we are not sure what is going on, and that doubt also creates fear. And fear and uncertainty prevents us from doing our best. Even if we think it is not, but it will, because in subconscious, it does affect our conduct in the outer world. Let us look at the statement itself again. Inna nahnu nazzalna al-zikra wa inna lahu la hafizun. Surely we have sent down this al-dhikr, and al-dhikr is, as we have seen, that it is of course zikr of Allah and is also zikr of human beings. And surely we are going to take care of this, and over here lahu indicates that. Why? La hafizun, and see la hafizun. The presence of law points to the fact that this preservation and protection of the book is for the benefit of mankind through mu'mineen, i.e. who will carry out their duties using the Quran. And next is, what will mu'mineen do? They will ensure that the Quran is presented to the world in every era as it needs to be presented. If Allah is taking this responsibility, then it also becomes our duty, and through the performance of this duty, we carry out all the associated tasks. For example, correct interpretation of its guidance, effective dissemination, making it understandable rationally to those who seek guidance, especially if Arabic is not their first language. In today's world, Arabic, not knowing Arabic should not be a handicap. There is so much now written on the Quran, and Allama Parwez has virtually covered every aspect of the Quran, the system of Deen, and on human self as well. And we have also published these books in English in the West. Understanding ourselves within the context of Deen so that mankind can identify restricting beliefs and then through deliberate action release themselves from these psychological chains. A chained mind, a chained recognition cannot bring out its best. And we should help them. After removing our own chains, we should help others to identify those chains and then help them to remove them gradually over a period of time. It cannot be done overnight. It takes time because we would like to change ourselves with the facing evidence in the world. With courage and iman, we must develop the ability to discern between truth and falsehood when confronting the variety of translations, meanings, and interpretations which do not direct towards the system of Deen. The Quran will always appeal to a rationally minded few and will gradually gain weight among the masses through our efforts. One of the things that came to my mind when I was putting these slides together is that because not a lot has been done in the past and people are now questioning more because of what is happening in the world and because of the social media and through these numerous communication means, is that people are in a better position to question the purpose of their own existence and why do human beings do harm to others. So these things are actually very favorable at this point. So we should be very encouraged and put some extra enthusiasm within ourselves to speed up our efforts. And of course, the first thing is we should come to grasp with the message so that we understand that what is the purpose of Deen and what is the role of a human self in the establishment of that system. And thank you very much for your time and for sharing this presentation.